latest EnvCast episode. EnvCast is a Society for the Environment podcast, bringing you environmental professionals in conversation each month. Our podcast is designed to provide insight into the lives of registered environmental professionals, featuring experts from across the wide range of sectors and disciplines. We explore what they do, why they do it, how they got to where they are now, and their future ambitions. Each guest is registered with us as a chartered environmentalist, registered environmental practitioner, or registered environmental technician via one of our professional body partners, known to us as our licensed members. As such, they've each been externally verified to confirm that they are committed to good practice in their environmental work. To learn more about the Society for the Environment, our environmental registrations, and our licensed members, please visit us at socenv.org.uk. So I'm delighted to invite Colin Church to EnvCast. Colin is the Chief Exec of the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining, and a Chartered Environmentalist through CRWM, the Chartered Institution of Waste Management. Can you tell us about your current job and your role at the moment?
So I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining, which is the global network for the materials cycle. We're one of the large professional engineering institutions, but we also have many people who are scientists and environmentalists amongst our membership as well. So my role is to help manage the activities of the Institute on a day-to-day basis, provide strategic direction, and to support our trustees to make sure that they are able to do their role as the final decision-making body for the Institute. And a lot of my time then is spent thinking about how we can best serve our members, how we can engage them in our activities, and how we can deliver the services to them that they need, particularly recording this as we are in February 2021, particularly therefore with a focus on how we can help people manage through the pandemic and the economic consequences of that.
Yeah, it's been certainly a big challenge that continues. So how long have you been with the Institute, Colin?
Just over 2 years. I came along at the back end of 2018, which was a really exciting time to join IOM3 because in 2019, the Institute celebrated its 150th anniversary. So I was heavily involved in the activities around that through the course of that year. Really, really fun time to be around.
Yeah, sort of completely different then from that 2018 through 2019 and obviously 2020, bringing us up to date. So what about the jobs that you had before you joined the Institute?
Immediately prior to being at IOM3, I was with CRWM, which is the professional body for folk involved in resource and waste management. Before that, I spent more than 20 years in the UK civil service. My focus through that time really was, I like to call it the theory and practice of regulation with an environmental bent. So I spent time working on climate change, on chemicals policy, and my last role there was as Director of Environmental Quality, the shorthand for which is everything environmental that's not wet or cuddly.
It's a good definition, very clear. So thinking about your current role and your chartered environmentalist, what are some of the ways that you you use your CEnv in the current tasks?
I suppose there are several different perspectives, if you like. First of all, when talking to some people, the fact that I can say I'm a chartered environmentalist gives me automatic credibility to them. It's not for everybody the case, but for some audiences it's definitely true. I think also in my role, because the provision of chartered engineer, environmentalist or scientist is quite a key part of what IOM3 does, to have gone through the process from the customer end, if you like, is a really important part of my understanding of that process and my ability to engage with that process from the supplier end of it.
Sure.
It also makes me part of a network of people who have a broadly similar, well, certainly a good level of competence, but a broadly similar set of interests in things to do with protecting and enhancing the environment. And that, I think, is one of the less obvious but more valuable aspects of being a chartered environmentalist.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly kind of branching out into areas, you say traditionally engineering or science, to really put that environmental slant on it is critical. And we're very, grateful for the work that you do at IM3 with that. So tell us about some of the challenges that you face in your current role.
Well, obviously, in common with virtually everybody else, a huge challenge is how we adapt to COVID-19 and pandemic and the lockdown. It's obviously had a significant impact on many of our members and the sectors they work in. For example, we have quite a few people who work in materials science and engineering in Rolls-Royce, and they've gone through a big restructuring because of the sharp decline in aerospace activity over the last 18 months. So how we support our members through all of that is a key part of it. In the short term, one of the things that we were able to do pretty quickly was to pivot to digital and online provision of the vast majority of our services. And I think that's been an important part of what we've done through 2020 and into 2021. And indeed, I think we've done that really rather well compared to perhaps some other organisations. But we were absolutely at the right point. We'd just completed an internal redoing of our digital capability, which meant that we were able to take advantage of that change. And then through the course of 2020, we underwent a fundamental digital transformation around our membership services. And that is putting us in a brilliant position to continue this and develop it further. So how to react to COVID-19 and everything to do with that is definitely one. In the longer term, although they're not necessarily entirely separate, there is the challenge of how do you demonstrate to everybody, employers and individuals and government and everybody else, the continued relevance of professional bodies. There are some areas of our membership where their professional membership is a key element of their license to operate, if you like. They have to have it in order to do the job that they do. But unlike lawyers or doctors, that's not the case across the majority of our areas. So we're always conscious of the fact that we have to demonstrate our relevance, as say, to members, but also to employers, so that they either support their employees in taking up membership or in volunteering to support the activities of the Institute, or indeed in terms of recognising those qualifications as something that they want their people to have. And I think that's a challenge that's shared across the professional sectors. So that's a long-term challenge for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, those two things kind of really come together. I mean, COVID has been wretched for so many people, but actually it's also given us an opportunity to step back a little bit and see what's important and the things that really matter, and looking how we build back better. And I'm guessing clearly from your work, the importance of professionalism and professional standards in that. How do we build back better and build the world that we need, whether we're responding to carbon challenges or biodiversity or anything else? Actually puts your members in a really critical position for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that our trustees did at the beginning of 2020, before the other foot fell around the pandemic, was adopt a new overarching strategy for IOM3. And it has two main headlines, if you like. One is being the best professional membership body we can be, and that speaks to what we've just been talking about in terms of the services and what have you. The second is to support professionals in materials, minerals and mining to be heroes of the necessary transition to a low carbon and resource efficient society, and not villains. And I think when we started talking about this, it very quickly became apparent that there's virtually nobody, if anybody, in the membership of IOM3, or indeed in the sectors that IOM3 members work in, who doesn't have a role to play in supporting, enabling, driving that transition that society needs to go through if we're going to, well, continue living on the planet, basically. But you know, everyone is part of that nexus who works on materials, minerals and mining, because stuff, materials, minerals, metals, whatever, are fundamental to that transition. You know, you just think about how much concrete is involved in a wind turbine, or how much copper there is in an electric car, or, you know, where do you get the silicon from for your solar panels? It's all materials that come out of the ground in one shape or form, or are recycled, that then go through some form of transformation and only by understanding those properties can you make the right kind of transformation to give you ever better versions of C above.
Sure. I mean, very clearly, looking back to 2019 and the focus on single-use plastics as well, again, key for your members to be able to help people understand the complexities of that challenge and actually what the right solutions are, rather than the sometimes marketing spin you'll get from people claiming something that isn't exactly beneficial environmentally as well.
Yeah, and you know, plastics is a classic example where one has to be very cautious about a simplistic response. Materials are not simplistic, and solutions to materials problems are not simple. And the people who sell a simple answer, unfortunately, are often hiding a great deal of complexity. So, as a classic example, single-use plastics, people start worrying about using plastic bottles for water. So you buy your water from a shop, in those days that we were allowed to wander around and buy water, and then you dispose of the bottle at the end of its use. Now, those plastic bottles are relatively valuable in materials terms, and their recycling rate is fairly high and rising. We get the fuss about single-use plastic, and then you start seeing people using things like aluminium cans or paper composite cartons for single-use water sales. The amount of carbon embedded in the aluminium is almost certainly substantially more than that embedded in the plastic. Yes, they're also highly recyclable and recycled, so that's good. But depending on what you care about in environmental terms, that might not be better than a single-use plastic bottle. And the paper cartons are starting to be a bit recycled, but they're still not brilliantly recycled, and very often will end up in landfill or incineration, and the materials are lost. And there are other impacts from growing trees and turn them into paper that might outweigh those of the plastic bottle, depending on the technologies you use, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, the right answer is to have a reusable bottle. So it's not single-use plastic that's the problem, it's single-use.
Yeah.
But that's a complicated story. And I've just taken 30 seconds, 60 seconds to explain it to somebody I know very well understands it. And how do you get that across in a 5-second intervention on a news show or whatever else? So it's a really tough thing. And that's where my members' expertise is so important, and why the Institute wants to help them to coalesce that and transmit it in ways that are effective.
Sure. I think that communication is so important. And going back to your point earlier about the relevance of professionalism and professional bodies, I think you've just summed it up perfectly, that we need to make very complicated situations very understandable by people. But who should you listen to when they're giving you a simplistic explanation? Someone who's got a kind of a nice kind of marketing or spin phrase, as opposed to an expert who's taken all of that and kind of narrowed it down for you. So I think that's really, for me, where the credibility from professional registration comes in, that people have that trust and they can believe what you're saying to them.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So tell us, how do you feel like you make a difference with your role?
I suppose being the chief executive of an organisation, you make a difference by your very existence, whether you mean to or not, because people are watching you all the time. I would say that I've done a number of things that I'm very proud of already in the time that I've been with IOM3. I think the digital transformation that we've undertaken has been really positive. I do encourage people to look at our new website and browse it. I think it's much more user-friendly and much more informative. I think that the team in general feels very cohesive and very focused, and we've managed to maintain that through the difficult time of COVID-19. And again, I'm really proud of that and the achievements of the team over that year, particularly because we were also delivering that digital transformation as we go. I think I've also found the team to be really positive about making some pro-sustainability changes, coming in right at the beginning and saying, oh, why don't we have a food waste collection? And they're jumping on that and implementing that for us. removing plastic cups from our meeting rooms and replacing them with reusable items, for example, just little things like that. And as soon as I said that's something that I'm interested in and I care about, there was a lot of passion, a lot of energy released to try and address some of those things. But I also think that we've done really, really well in refocusing a lot of our efforts and attention on member services and member benefits, making the case for being a member of IOM3 much clearer, much stronger, and much more engaging for our members and those who ought to be members.
Great, thanks, Colin. So you talked about your time with a couple of professional bodies, and before that kind of time within the civil service, with some really great roles. Tell us a little bit about why you kind of chose the profession that you did, or did the profession choose you, so to speak?
Well, yeah. So I ended up in the civil service by accident. I didn't really anticipate staying very long once I joined, because before I went into the civil service, I had this completely false view that being a civil servant meant that between a late start and an early lunch, you counted paper clips and then you went home. And so far from the truth, I could not have been. So I joined and I got allocated to the Department for the Environment as my first role, and got involved in a number of activities, the Environmental Action Programme of the European Union, the OECD Environmental Performance Review of the UK, some quite macro level environmental issues. And I think that was quite formative for me, because from the very beginning of my engagement with environmental policy, I had to be thinking about the big picture. I couldn't just think about water quality or air quality or any one issue, which in and of itself is pretty complicated and difficult. But I had to think about the balance and the trade-off, and more widely the trade-off as it was seen at the time between protecting the environment on the one hand and developing the economy on the other. So for me, that really was where I got the big interest. And then I did various other roles in the civil service. You'll know that it's very common for civil servants to move departments and roles on a fairly regular basis. And but I kept on circling back round to things environmental, and bringing back to the theory and practice of environmental regulation, thinking that I'd been able to do in other areas. So some time I spent on literally thinking about the theory and practice of regulation as a concept was then hugely helpful when it came to thinking about how to try and push changes through in how we looked at things on the ground, if you like.
So did you have that environmental interest when you joined the civil service, or was it something that kind of developed once you were there?
No, we're talking in deep and dark, dank, distant past here. We're talking in the 90s, when I don't think that most people had a very high level of environmental awareness. I guess I was sort of interested, and I remember studying climate change at school, for example. But I wouldn't say that I was a passionate environmentalist or anything like that. So yes, I think it's really that over time, to be honest with you, my view is that when you sit down and start thinking about these things, it's a bit of a no-brainer that we need to do something differently. Otherwise, we're in deep doo-doos.
Yeah, indeed. And you're right, the 90s was a very different time. Thankfully, public awareness is far, far greater now. And it's really great to see so many people getting so interested about the changes that we need to make. It's really, really positive. Okay, so how important is it for you to be recognised as an environmental professional?
I think that it is a helpful thing. I think when I was a civil servant, it wasn't something that was ever thought about. Civil servants, with a few exceptions, but generally civil servants feel slightly nervous about professional memberships, because it feels almost as if there's a competing loyalty that might be there. And you have a code of professional conduct as a civil servant, and if you then had a code of professional conduct as a professional member, what would you do if there was ever any conflict between the two of them? There are exceptions. So lawyers very often will still remain professional members of their legal association and so on, but your routine policy official. So I guess I got used to a world where people didn't really notice that very much. Since then, it's become much more obvious the value that it can have in conversations. And it's, I think you mentioned when you were talking earlier that it's a badge, a shortcut badge. So if you understand a bit about professional registration as an employer or a commissioner of a piece of advice, then you don't have to do as much due diligence about an individual if they are a chartered environmentalist,
Sure.
and if they're not, because you know they meet certain standards. And that, I think, is something that is both powerful and undervalued.
Sure, yeah, completely. It's someone's been recognised by a group of their peers at a point in time, but they've also committed to maintain that through their continued professional development, and, as you say, signed that code of conduct in how they're going to work. And I think those three things together make a really powerful combination. So what would you say to others who are thinking about a career in the environment?
I guess I'd say two things. One is there's absolutely a place for people who spend all of their careers thinking about environmental issues. And I would not want to discourage people from seeing that as their way forward. However, I think there is huge value in people who do other things, but with an environmental concern in their minds. And so, for example, this is one of the reasons why IOM3 was so keen to be an early adopter of the Registered Environmental Practitioner Award, because it seems to us that that's the perfect level for somebody whose main focus might be science or engineering, but who has an additional environmental string to their bow and wishes that to be properly recognised and suitably labelled, if you like. And again, you know, this IOM3 theme around supporting professionals in materials, minerals and mining to be heroes of the transition to low carbon and resource efficient society, not villains. I'm not expecting all of my members to become environmental activists overnight, or indeed ever. That's not the point. The point is to think about those environmental issues as part of your other day job, to make sure that you're bringing that understanding and that way of thinking to what you're doing, not just to stop doing it altogether and do something else completely. So really, I suspect many of the people that you might interview on this podcast series would say, yes, go into the environment field, work in it for your entire career. It's fantastic. It's hugely rewarding. And that is all true. I absolutely agree that is true. And I wouldn't want to dissuade anyone from doing that. But particularly if you can't choose between that and something else, why not do both?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that's one of the really big drivers for us developing the Registered Environmental Practitioner, was to open up professional registration around the environment to a whole new community, as I said, who can demonstrate that they do environment well alongside whatever else they do. But they also can make that commitment to how they're going to work as well. So that was absolutely the driver. So that's really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so what's next for you?
Well, 2021, obviously we need to work through the pandemic and its consequences and figure out how we can capture the really good things that we've learned over the last 18 months and keep those going forward, whilst bringing back some of the good things that we lost. And the classic example is video meetings work really, really well, but they're not a direct substitute for physical meetings. There's a merit in both of them. How do we blend those two things together, either in the same hybrid event or balancing between the two formats over time? Virtual meetings have been hugely beneficial for one of the things that I'm fairly passionate about outside of the environment, which is inclusion, diversity, and equality. Our activities are much more accessible geographically, chronologically, and in terms of, you know, the other commitments in one's life, if they're virtual rather than if they're physical. We have members in the far north of Scotland, for example, and for them to attend a physical event, an hour seminar one evening in Edinburgh would have taken them an entire day, let alone London. Now it takes them an hour. So there's lots of real benefits. And then, of course, there's the carbon footprint issues and the environmental positiveness about virtual versus real. How do we capture those good things whilst also maintaining that real benefit of the face-to-face interaction, the accidental inspiration that you get from physical presence with each other? So that's a real challenge for us that I'm really excited about. Another one that I think is in the space, so we committed to the net zero campaign that SocEnv and others started last year. Obviously 2020 is going to be a very weird year. Our scope 3 emissions have gone through the floor because nobody's traveling to or from work and whatever. But we want to make sure that we're continuing to improve our overall carbon emission footprint as we go forward, and that's a challenge for us all. And that continuing campaign effort, focus on being the best professional membership body we can be. How do we deliver those services at a price? Yes, because that's an important element that members are prepared to pay, giving them the service that they really want. So that is a continuing process, and that will never finish. I think in any body that is member dominated, led, founded, you're always going to need to do that, to focus on what you are doing for your members and how you're doing it for your members. IOM3 would not exist without its members. There would be nothing I could do about that if I had no members. It's pretty fundamental.
Yeah, sure. And say really interesting challenges that many people will be focusing on, and exciting times as well. As I said, COVID has been completely wretched, and we cannot forget that. But actually, that how do we use some of the good things, as you say, diversity and inclusion is a really important strand of everything that we do. Yeah. So how do we build on those good things, bring back some of the things that we've lost, and kind of move forward together? So
absolutely. And one of the things that we're doing throughout this year is we've got a bit of a theme running, which we're calling Sustainable Future. And what we're trying to do is to use it as a way of showcasing the role that our members can and do play in that transition that we've been talking about. And we've got a whole series of events that will be under that banner as we go through, from all sorts of different perspectives. And I think it just goes to show the breadth of interest and ideas that there are out there as to how people in materials, minerals and mining can be supportive of that transition.
Fantastic. Look forward to seeing those at SocEnv. We love a story. We love to know what people are doing, so that would be great. Okay, so just to finish off, if you were able to influence world leaders for a day, what would be the first thing that you would do? It doesn't have to be about the environment, but just what would that first thing be?
That's a really, where do you start? I'm torn. I think that there's a large part of me that says make them put in place a decent carbon price, because that would drive a lot of the things that we're talking about. But actually, I wonder whether the most important thing that I could do would be to create a world in which there was universal access to education for all wealth and all gender, because actually that is an even more fundamental building block to lots of things that we're talking about. If more women had better access to education, if more poorer people had better access to education, that would make substantial differences to all sorts of areas of the planet's life. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Actually, it's really, really important. Fabulous. Well, hopefully some of that will come true. Colin, that's been fabulous. Thank you very much for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed.
If you're curious to hear more about Chartered Environmentalist, Registered Environmental Practitioner and Registered Environmental Technician registers, please take a look at our How to Become and Why Become recorded webinars on our website, socenv.org.uk. Or you can visit us on our YouTube channel, Society for the Environment, where they are available alongside our topical environmental webinar series, where you can also like and subscribe. You can also follow us on Twitter at SocEnv_HQ to keep up to date with all of the latest society news. We will release a new episode on the first Wednesday of every month, So if you're interested in our future podcasts, please subscribe to hear more about us. You can subscribe and review through a variety of platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Castbox. Thank you for listening or watching on YouTube. We look forward to the next episode next month.